This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by bridgeLT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, bridgeLT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
HR trailblazer Penny Weatherup joins us to unpack her 18-year journey shaping Volkswagen's people strategy through industry upheavals. She reveals how data-driven talent programs and bold DEI initiatives became competitive advantages, why People Director beats HR, and the stakeholder chess game of German automakers. Her career advice: challenge the why, then build the how. I'm really excited to sit down with Penny Weatherup today in this episode of Leap Forward. Penny, welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to have you on here. Why don't you kind of just kick things off by giving a little bit of a kind of a career history to date with a few of the major moments along that journey?
So I started my career in hospitality, running a small pub hotel, and decided that was hard work, which I don't mind, but I wasn't getting paid enough for it. So, and at the time I was with a partner who then we split up. So 2 years into that, I thought, right, I need something where I need to want to join an organisation where they're going to develop me, but give me opportunities to progress. So ended up joining financial services organisation, which became AXA. It's now known as AXA, and spent 11 years there, working in the business and the sales side, and then moving into HR. Moved to a private practice law firm, set up their HR function. They worked with intellectual property and trademarks. And then I moved to be with my now husband, so took a part-time job at Volkswagen, 4 days a week on a fixed-term contract, and was there 18 years. And I'd done the people director role there for nearly 8 years, so it was time for me to do something different.
Wow, fantastic. And tell me a little bit about your time at VW.
When I joined there, I was what they called then was an HR manager, became an HR business partner. So really worked in the operational side of HR, supporting the business. Loved the sales side, marketing. Loved the VW brands. Still very passionate about our brands. I think once you've worked for an organisation like that, it stays with you. And then I became head of HR operations, and then the opportunity. I was really sponsored really well actually into the HR director role, and that was my tenure, if you like, over the 18 years. So there was always something different, always something to focus on, and the business itself was constantly changing. And many good colleagues and friends made working there over that period of time, and in a very successful, challenging environment. And of course, there were things along the way that were more challenging.
Tell me about that, because you've obviously had an incredible career, and obviously this podcast is all about sort of training, development, skills, learning, and something which is absolutely kind of core to the role of HR. And you've done that, in a really large organization, as you said, through huge amounts of change. Bring that to life for me a bit.
I think the first thing that I really noticed when I joined Volkswagen Group was the huge pride in the organisation. I'd never worked anywhere where there was so much pride, and I loved the fact that there was a tangible product. So you look, feel, you drive it, you experience it. So I suppose in some ways it's one of the closest experiences of being close to the customer, when you can actually use the product and work with it and drive it yourself. And I think that drive and that ambition and the success of the organisation was really attractive. So from a developmental point of view, there was always a reason to do more, to do better, to reach the next target, to implement whatever the next product was, and it drove a huge pride in the organisation. Of course, in 2015, we had the emissions crisis, and there is never a crisis such as that to make people really step up. And I think that's where pride in the organisation played a huge part, because it's an organisation that just was not used to any kind of failure or criticism. And maybe that's why it fell quite hard. Um, but that gave those people that were involved, and I was someone involved in that, in responding to that crisis, particularly from a people perspective. So I've talked about the pride piece. Well, suddenly, when we did our next engagement survey, pride was definitely not the highest score on there. There was a lot that people were processing, a lot of long servers who were very disappointed. Um, in the organisation. So through that, through transformational change with moving to selling vehicles direct online, and again, since I've left, that some of that strategy has changed as well, but that was a big transformation piece. And also just transforming the shape of the organisation through quite a couple of quite significant changes whilst I was there. Because you have to be fit for then, now, and then also really fit for the future. So if I think about my career, those opportunities gave me the chance to shine, I suppose, and be noticed and be appreciated for what I was able to deliver for the organisation. Equally, there's often some quite big learnings around that as well. So it's not always a smooth and smooth path. And I think the other part as well that I really appreciated, particularly when I became people director, it was being able to build a really successful team and a really successful function. And I like to think that on leaving that was part of my legacy. And that takes a lot of work. You can't do that overnight. Um, and but also the pleasure and the gratification of seeing members of your team thrive as well and progress their own careers.
It's got a kind of curious question, which is, what's the difference between HR and people?
Nothing. People is just for me, a more direct way of saying what the department actually looks like. Human resources has all sorts of things, connotations and nicknames that go with it, doesn't it? And it's quite
Yeah.
stiff.
Yeah. It's like IT, isn't it?
Yeah,
Sort of, in a way, I
yeah,
suppose.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's about people.
That's what it's
So why
about.
not say it's about people? So yeah, I changed my job title a few years ago when I was there to people director. And in actual fact, there was feedback from the team. They wanted that to happen because also they could see that other organisations were doing similar. So it's reflective of kind of the market.
VW or Volkswagen, German business, UK. Tell me a little bit about those markets and or motherships.
Yeah, it's a really good question because there's another overlay with that as well, which is that obviously within the Volkswagen Group in the UK, there is more than one brand. So we were always, particularly our brands, had the UK, to which they were answerable to the UK MD, but also to what we would call the factories or the headquarter in whichever country or part of Germany that they were based in. So that overlay gives it a different complexity. And if you ever want to learn how to work in a highly driven stakeholder led environment, Volkswagen is a good one to do because you have more than one stakeholder all the time that you need to operate with and work with and keep informed and develop positive relationships with, really. So, in terms of the challenges that went around that go with the role, there was first a lot of stakeholder management, but from the people perspective, it was fairly straightforward to manage to work with my stakeholders that were in Germany. So from an HR perspective in Germany, um, because quite often, we had our own initiatives that we were introducing that were complementary to what they were asking us to do. The biggest challenge was, for instance, if we wanted to make some form of change, we needed all of the brands and the functions in some instance, for instance, the after sales function, we needed them all to be aligned. And it took time through those directors to get that alignment quite often. So it could slow things down, um, but I'd say most people were fairly well equipped and experienced to be able to manage those relationships. So we were able to continue, driving the business forward.
It's really interesting. You used the word equip there, and sort of leads me to my kind of next question, I suppose. So it was 18 years, I think you said.
Yeah.
So obviously you've seen a huge amount of change going on in the industry, loads of big things to talk about. Kind of
Mm,
that's EV
mm.
and even navigating through the challenges as you said, moving online and or COVID thrown into the mix, I suppose, as well.
Yeah.
How did you kind of approach kind of, the kind of, I suppose, the challenges of equipping and enabling and developing that kind of culture and learning and, as you kind of led that side of the business?
Yeah, I think in a very so first of all, the response was always very systematic.
Hmm.
So a very clear approach. Employee communications are really key, so important. Feedback as well is really important so that we can answer questions or address topics that are coming up in terms of uncertainties. Feedback from our employees about how best to approach, um, these sorts of challenges, because sometimes they are really close to the front line, if you like. So their feedback's really important. Um, so systematic approach, being very planful, keeping everybody involved and informed, back to that stakeholder piece across the whole business. Certainly keeping people within my own team informed. And one of the biggest challenges always is being able to share enough information so that people know what they're doing, but equally not confusing it either. So that piece around communication and engagement is really important. I'm super, super keen to have a plan always, whether it's a response to a crisis or a challenge, or whether it's just the strategy. There's a plan, and we have that set out, and the team knows exactly what the deliverables are over, say, a 3-year period. But then it comes down to month by month, and that way everybody's targeted in and aligned on the same objectives. And being able to support people through that process means that those people, for instance, if I take my team, I think they develop their careers and they don't develop their capability through that, because they're able to see the measure of their own success as they progress, whether it's launching a new talent attraction site, whether it's launching a new leadership program, which we did, we're launching a whole program about culture change, which we did. Um, they're the topics that people get the most satisfaction from delivering, because it's, as I did, because it's more than operational delivery. It really is about change. And you can't have organisation development and change without having the cultural piece that goes on with it. So hopefully that gives a bit of a flavour for you about some of the bigger topics that we had to introduce. Wasn't reinventing ourselves, but it
Hmm.
was certainly taking the organisation forward on the next step to be able to focus on some of those current challenges, but also being prepared for the future.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And talking perhaps about the specifics of the skills changes that you saw, as the rise of EV, and it's well known that now the car contains more code and compute than a
Yeah.
you know a plane, and we can go on about that forever, sort of thing. So you're there navigating that sort of, and you talked about talent acquisition campaigns just then, which I think is really interesting. So how do you kind of go about sort of like, ensuring that the organization is kind of fit for purpose and also future fit, I suppose, in a sense.
As a board, we were really aligned and clear on what our strategy was. So that's the first piece, and that was led by our MD at the time. Um, and if you have that cohesiveness as a top line alignment, each of the different brands and functions within that, and people team was exactly the same, was that our objectives, our strategy was there to support the delivery of that overarching piece. So at the time, we had online sales, we had EV, what it was uh, doing was meaning that we needed some different skills in the organisation. So CRM, different approach with our customers, understanding their needs, digital, um, and analytics. Really big piece around analytics and being able to qualify um, customer data insights differently and in a more forensic way, probably, than we ever had done before. Um, that certainly applied to our people insights. Quarterly we would be producing people insights for the board to review, to give information, but also to be able to spot trends, to be able to give feedback, to be able to ask them in some respects, the rest of the board, to work with their teams to discuss what it meant for their areas and were there any things that they needed to address, any good feedback for the teams, any challenges, etc. So that was from a people team perspective. But then, we were going out to market to hire over the last 3, 5 years to hire data analysts. That was a huge change. The skill sets that we actually needed in our IT function had changed as well. So as that changed, as the external environment changed, so did the internal. And that led to some of the organisation change that happened in terms of the design of the organisation. But it also was recognised through the behavioural sets that we needed our people to demonstrate, which were included in kind of the how they delivered as part of their objectives, and also led into the need for some cultural change.
As you kind of progress through your career, how did you start to sort of use technology to help with the, I suppose, in a sense, the sort of the upskilling, of the kind of the organization, training and development, really critical, right, to being a future facing kind of organization.
We started the COVID accelerated some of
Yeah.
that, of course, because, face to face wasn't possible, and even and training or development online has its place, but is not for every topic. So we had already implemented online training support. So that was with a very well known provider that you could just go on and select. There's hundreds of different courses that employees could select and use. And at the time, that was right. But we saw that a fall off with that as well in terms
Right.
of the engagement. Uh, we so, from a tech perspective, we would have some, some employees and also some development initiatives that would support that. And in fairness, the functions themselves are the best experts at what's
Yeah.
required. So they would be sourcing and implementing that training. From a people perspective, what that meant was we introduced the rather than the skills and technical expertise necessarily, we were then driving the behavioural and cultural change that needed to shift in the organisation. So focusing on topics such as accountability, um, being the best that you can be. Team was really important in terms of cross team working and cross team functionality, and we created a whole suite of values around that as well. So that was our focus really, and then what we would offer then is more of the general kind of development training that people would be interested in accessing. But specific to the change, we developed a leadership development program. So I had someone in my team that put that together, and all of our senior leadership team went through that. And it included one to one coaching, group sessions, and um, in person. So that was it was the complete
Mm.
opposite of what we'd experienced in COVID. It took a couple of years post-COVID for us
Yeah.
to be in that place, and to make that investment, to be honest, because that's a significant investment in people, both in time and money. And But I personally think it was one of the best things that we did to enhance and support that senior leadership team development.
Tell me a little bit about sort of, what you believe are the kind of the essential sort of metrics and measures that you need to kind of put in place to basically kind of measure success, right, in terms of people and that sort of side of a business.
My ex-colleagues wouldn't forgive me if I didn't say it was the commercial result. So if we got the right people, we're going to deliver our commercial result, and that is true. So that's the biggest. And within when I say commercial result, that is a whole suite. I used to say, if it moves, we measure it. Um, it's not always the best thing, but we had a lot of metrics that we needed to deliver and achieve for our business, not least of which a profitable performance. And of course, we had our retail network as well that we worked really closely with, and their profitability was really, really important to us as well. So from a top line perspective, that the commercial piece. If you come down a bit further into what does success look like for people, we had a whole suite of behavioural measures, which would be part of the performance review mid-year and end of year. But it had a typically Germanic overview on it, so it did align with our parent company in terms of what that they would expect us to do. It was, but in okay, spoiling it down a bit, um, it's how it's about how you deliver. So it's not the what. So you can get a fantastic sales result, or you can deliver a fantastic program, but if you've not displayed the right behaviours during that, then that will have caused problems elsewhere. So it's about making sure that the what you deliver and the how are equally important. So how managers manage. Um, we would run an engagement survey every year, and managers would be assessed as part of that in terms of the feedback from their wider team, um, and uh, the how people develop their team, um, how people engage on a moment by moment basis with people. So that kind of feedback would come through as well. And there was specific um, wording that was accredited to each of those areas. It always gets some mixed reviews on personal reviews about how meaningful that is, etc. But it was the language that we talked about people's performance. And we would look at particularly the senior leadership team's performance as well. And as a board, we would have some discussion about senior leadership team's performance and endeavour to be able to provide really positive but also developmental feedback wherever it was necessary. And that really is the crux of a performance review. It's to get the positive and also get some things that maybe you could just do better or think about, and then rolls through the investment of so what support might you need in terms of development to get there.
And how did you go about budgeting for that development? What's the sort of the investment case you'd present to the board for that?
Well, we had a budget every year,
Yeah.
and in true style, it got chipped away at as we went through budget rounds. Um, and we worked really hard to deliver really good value for the development programs and investment that we felt was required with senior leadership teams. So my conversations would generally be with my finance director and his team about the budgets that were required based on what was being recommended by my senior leadership team. And we would dance around things a bit, but generally come out on an agreed number that was the appropriate for that year. But always with a that's what's agreed, but if you can bring it in lower, that would be appreciated. And you tend to find that around, people investment, because it is a cost for the organisation. Resource is a cost, and development activities are cost. And then when you're in an environment as well that's looking to trim or to cut or to be more effective and efficient, always have to look at what you can do with the numbers.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? Because it's a double-sided coin, right? Of value and cost, and you've got to kind of play that line so carefully,
And
right?
that's where you have to be quite, I'd say, quite committed, or very committed to
Yeah.
your own belief. So as a people director, if I believed it was the right thing, I would argue for it. If I believed that there was something where we could perhaps make a little bit of a shift, then so there was some savings, then absolutely I would support that. I think the challenge for all HR functions is always being able to justify the spend, because it can be quite an easy area to remove budget from, and therefore um, there's probably no immediate impact of that. But then what you find is over a couple of year period, then where you're not either it can affect retention, but actually it can also affect performance. And we've just not invested in people enough to keep people well enough developed to be able to meet those ongoing challenges. So it's a bit of a there is always a bit of a balance, but I'm always really passionate about the need to invest in people, but invest in the right things. So not just run a course that comes up every year that everybody just drops onto because that's what you need to do. It's about, well, what's right for the organisation and what's right for the people as well. So taking feedback as well around what the teams were interested and needed, and that would come out through their performance reviews as well.
You've been known in the industry for some pioneering work that you've done around diversity and equality in the
Yeah.
market. And I'd love to kind of just sort of, you talked about talent acquisition kind of campaign earlier. So tell me more about kind of what's driving you in that sense.
For me, it's quite simple. It's about fairness. And I've all it's quite a big piece of me. I know that from, my own career. If you feel that you've not been treated fairly, or somebody else has been had a had for whatever reason a benefit over and above one that I might have had, and they've got a role, for example. So when I um, applied for my first HR job in AXA, I was working in the business, and I applied for the role. I'd already started doing my professional studies, applied for a role, and got knocked back because I hadn't got HR experience. So I was like, well, how am I supposed to get HR experience if you're not prepared to do it? Anyway, second job came up in the same team, so I went again, and they still hadn't filled the first role, so they had to take me, I think. So, but that kind of thing, I get quite intense about. So when I was knocked back for the first role and didn't even get an interview, I rang up the senior hiring manager and said, why? Challenged it. So that for me it's about giving people a chance. And diversity, equity and inclusion is about that, because if you're not going to open up your net as wide as possible to consider all kinds of different people, whatever their backgrounds are, their educational qualifications are, etc., how do you know you're getting the best? And if you don't give people the chance to compete in that environment, then you're never going to know that. So really, it started very much from female representation at a senior level. So we had a 30% target, which we achieved by the time I left. But that broadened out quite quickly so that it covered all aspects of diversity. We hired an expert into my team who became our go-to person on all matters of DE&I. And she made a huge difference. And actually, what we found as well was the organisation very quickly came with us on that journey. So it was a surprise, but not a surprise that so many people had a very strong positive view about the need for greater diversity. So it then, and we had 6 or 7 different employee network engagement groups who focused. So we had one that focused on female representation, one that focused on ethnicity representation. Uh, we had one on parents and carers, different sexual orientation and choices around that. So it felt like every type of diversity that could be in the organisation was represented in terms of employees having a voice. So that grew, and we were recognised with a couple of awards, external awards on that too. And I was recognised as well for that with Julia Muir's 30% Automotive Club as well. So that's not the driver, of course, but it's lovely to be recognised when you've made a difference for people. And my team made a big difference for people. They were so passionate about it.
Playing back in my mind this conversation you're having with the finance director along the lines of what you're describing earlier around that double-sided coin, what's the kind of the business case you were pitching, or did you need to?
To be honest, with my FD, I didn't.
Mhm.
And all of my board colleagues were all bought into it. So there was no real pitch required from that point of view. So I was fortunate. The organisation was fortunate to have such an open-minded board. Um, but I think sometimes um, there was a need for some healthy explanation about what it was that we were trying to achieve. When we were originally just focusing on female representation, we would get feedback from men saying, "Well, what about the men?" Um, fair comment. But what we were trying to achieve was to get some sort of equality there. Um, And it took time, I think, for some of the rationale and the approach to be fully understood. But I think in society, as that became much more relevant as well, it became easier, I think, for those messages to be embraced by majority of our employees. And if employees wanted to be directly involved, they could be. Um, and I think it was something that quite a few employees would probably be quite proud of and would probably talk to if they got families. I mean, we sponsored MK Pride, for instance. I mean, years ago, we would never have probably thought of that, but Volkswagen brand itself sponsored MK Pride. We had a huge amount of employees engaged in that, and it was done from a desire to support that, particularly within the Milton Keynes area, to be able to do that, and nothing really to do with vehicle sales. We'd always have a vehicle there, but dressed up in the Pride colours, but it was nothing to do with that in itself. It was, yes, it's great because it gave us some exposure in terms of what we were doing in Milton Keynes, but it was driven from the heart, really, about what was the right thing to do.
When you made the move from AXA to Volkswagen, um, possibly even before then, if you want, what sort of advice would you be giving, knowing what you know now?
Don't be afraid to have really high aspirations, career aspirations. I never would have thought I would be a or HR director. Never. Wasn't on my plan. I probably didn't really even have a plan. My drive was to be self-sufficient, was to earn a good salary, and also to be able to have a skill which was transferable. So you can see that within those organisations, I've changed because it's a technical skill, like there are most technical areas of any business, but it means that a door will open. So, for instance, if you want to move sector, for me, it was relatively straightforward to do that because my skills allowed me to do that. And when I was hiring people into my team, I quite often looked for different sector experience because you bring different ideas and approaches. Uh, so I would say that be yeah be more focused on what it is that you can achieve. Uh, yeah, and invest in yourself. I did a lot of self development, and I funded some of my own development as well. Um, I was fortunate enough. AXA helped fund my CIPD qualifications. So
Mm.
there was that support available. But push for it and continue to learn, really. Probably in my later years of my career, I did less of that,
Mhm.
um, but certainly up until probably till I was a people director, I think where time just gets hoovered up a bit more, the energy sapped a bit. Um, but that definitely makes a huge difference. But you have to be self-motivated to do that and push. It doesn't come just by sitting still or not having a goal. Um, you've got to work hard for it. I said that the other day in another call I was on. It's hard work to progress your career. Um, but if you do, invest energy from yourself, and work hard and develop, and uh, work hard to develop good relationships with colleagues as well. Your career will progress.
I love your point around the AXA thing where you said you asked the question why as well. I think that's like it's kind of the push, right? It's the same again. It's just yeah, I get a lot of sense of that from this conversation. So I'm going to ask you a few quick fire sort of questions now. Tell me the first thing that comes into your head, okay? So if you could download any skill into your brain like the Matrix, what would it be?
Super analytical skills to be able to look at it and
Yeah.
go,
Okay.
yeah,
I like
it
that.
takes me longer to do it than others.
If you were in a Volkswagen, who's your dream passenger?
See, I'm of an age now where I think about people and they've actually passed away.
Oh, they can be alive or dead if you want.
Can they?
Yeah, yeah.
Michael Hutchins.
That's a teleportation becomes real. Where's the first place you go?
I've been there, but I'd go to the Barrier Reef for a live bit, not a dead bit.
Um, ultimate driving song?
Oh, I've been listening to the Glasto tracks. It would be one of Alanis Morissette's ones. And I can't remember a title at the moment, but it'd be Alanis Morissette.
And finally, a Marvel superpower that you'd love to have?
A really great kick-ass kung fu move.
Brilliant, Penny. Well, I think I need to let everyone into the secret that you are heading to Glastonbury next. So have a great time.
Thank
And
you.
thank you so much for this conversation.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.